Next, Manchester City. Very interesting time to talk about City with everything that's kind of gone on. I would first like to say it is not possible for Erling Haaland to simultaneously be a unstoppable human force and the problem to Manchester City's attack. It's one, the other, or neither. It cannot be both. Every time it's good or bad, we change collectively, we change the narrative about this guy. And I'm really sick of it. He is brilliant. He is also not set up to play at his very best to maximize his potential because of City's system, and that was always going to be the reality of the situation. He's doing just fine. It's also going to take guys a while to actually adjust to him and for Pep to figure out how to maximize this. There's also the reality that the way they play, and I don't think this gets talked about enough, always puts them at risk because they are so, and only comes up in the Champions League, really. They're so reliant on control, right? Control possession, control of the tempo of the game, that if one thing goes wrong, it has a tendency to snowball, and if one thing goes wrong, they're not good at improvising because that's not what they do. They can't thrive in chaos like Liverpool can, or, has over this period of time. And so, and this sport is kind of a great equalizer in that sense, right? Of course, they win a ridiculous amount of games. But on any given day, if things don't go quite right, Southampton can beat them. It's when two or three plays can decide a game in favor of one team or another, no matter how talented you are and how much better you are player for player than the other team, it's a lot easier to hang in there holding on for dear life defensively than it is to try and, score with the Kevin Durant, Steph Curry, Klay Thompson, Draymond Green Warriors for an entire game. It's what makes this sport fun for me, part of it. The other thing is, Erling Haaland's not the one who's being sloppy in possession. To me, that's the biggest takeaway from these last couple games. They just don't look like Manchester City. And maybe some of it is being tired, and I also will continue to say I don't think enough attention gets paid to this idea of trying to repeat as champions, which City have done a pretty good job of being able to go again. And now you've got some of these guys who have, 2, 3, 4 Premier League titles. You're just never going to convince me the motivation level is the same for this Manchester City team outside of Haaland, basically, as it is for that Arsenal team that's been nowhere close to this before. That's not a criticism of Manchester City's professionalism. That's not a shot at their players. To me, it's just how humans are wired. It's just there's an extra level of motivation you can draw from when you are trying to do something for the first time, when you lost in the championship the season before, stuff like that. That as much as you want to, and it's kind of what made Michael Jordan great, right? That he somehow found a way to draw from that motivation that shouldn't be available to him, but he found a way. There just aren't many humans wired like that can do that. And so there is a level of complacency that steps in as much as you want to fight against it. And now this is officially on pace, as of now, to be their worst season in this stretch. Since Pep has turned them into what they are, since outside of that 2019-20 season. It is still entirely possible they finish with a point total that is in the ballpark of what they have outside of those 2 seasons where they were ridiculously, historically great. And that's the point I keep coming to. This isn't as out of the ordinary as we're making it seem. We're just comparing Manchester City to the Manchester City teams that were among the best in the history of the league and, scored 100 goals and collected 100 points. And they don't do that every season. There was a small stretch where that's who they were. And they weren't the past 3-4 seasons. That's not who they've been. They have taken a slight step back because it's awfully difficult to continue to get 100 points in this league. The final thing I want to say, over the past couple seasons, Ferran Torres, Raheem Sterling, Gabriel Jesus, Alexander Zinchenko have left. Also Fernandinho. Impact on the field, not so much. Leadership, experience, understanding how to navigate a Premier League season, he brings value there. So I'm throwing him into that mix too. And your key players who have come in, Jack Grealish, Julian Alvarez, Calvin Phillips. Grealish sometimes starts, sometimes doesn't. Hasn't ever really got going at City. Alvarez is playing more for Argentina than City at this point because he's behind Haaland. Not a criticism of him. He's a very good player, and he's going to have a very bright future. My point is he wasn't supposed to be a guy that's going to help you immediately anyway. I would argue he's been better outside of even what he did at the World Cup than he was expected to be right when he got to City. And Calvin Phillips has been injured and mostly sits on the bench. That's where the money has gone these past couple seasons. And all of those other guys who, varying, levels of contribution, but all those guys were allowed to walk. You didn't see much of that in the years before. Leroy Sané is the one guy that comes to mind. Of course, there is some change here, some change there. But those guys, Raheem Sterling played a prominent role, but the other guys were part of this machine and understood exactly how Pep wants it to work. And this new group, it hasn't been a particularly smooth transition. So I wanted to bring that up too, because I think it's part of the story. They just haven't, it's not a talent decrease, but they just don't have quite as many guys from a look at what they've done for Manchester City and how Pep has molded them into the player he wants them to be sitting on their bench anymore. Because the guys he's brought in the past couple of seasons haven't really gotten acclimated yet. And maybe over time they do. I'm the biggest Calvin Phillips fan you'll find. But for this season and looking at what has sort of gone wrong and why they are where they are, that's part of the story for me.